I don't need to tell you that Persona 3 is a story about life and death, do I? Memento Mori, Latin for remember that you will die, is the tagline of the game, a famous reminder to cherish each day and live life to the fullest because it will eventually end. There are countless great video essays and analyses that talk about Persona 3 in this regard already, so I don't want to just repeat what you've heard argued many times before. I want to go a little deeper. Let's take the life and death messaging as a given, and use it to explore the full scope of the ideologies and symbolism present in the story with a full literary analysis. Obviously, life and death are the core themes of the game, and they'll still be a primary focus in our discussion, but I want us to analyze precisely how Persona 3 incorporates them into its gameplay loop and utilizes them to convey a greater message. Once we've done that, then, naturally, we also need to figure out what that ultimate message is so we can apply it to our own lives. To accomplish this, we're going to be doing two things. First, we're going to be taking a comprehensive look at Persona 3's entire structure and repeatedly asking ourselves one question: why? For example, why does the story follow the life of a high school student? Why is the full moon used as a reoccurring symbol? Why is Takaya shirtless? Everything in the game is in it for a reason, and even details that might seem mundane, unimportant, or just funny could and do have significant thematic meaning. Even if you already know that Persona 3 explores themes of life and death, you probably don't realize just how deep the rabbit hole goes. So, in short, we're not going to be summarizing the story beat by beat, but rather sincerely asking why each beat is in the game at all. Afterward, we'll be able to bring it all together and learn what Persona 3 is really trying to say, and, among other things, we'll come to quite a surprising conclusion: that we, the player, are not meant to be the hero of Persona 3. That the silent protagonist we control and name is not a self-insert in the typical meaning of the term. That we are instead represented by a different character in the story. There's another character that is meant to be our surrogate. As a result, from this point on, I'm going to be referring to the protagonist by his canon name, Makoto Yuki, to better treat him like the real character he is. Before we begin, a couple of quick things. First, since we need to talk about every aspect of the game, that means we will be spoiling the entirety of Persona 3, from the bosses we fight to the ending of the story. This will be your one and only spoiler warning. I'll also tag on a potentially sensitive content warning, since this game is very psychologically heavy with its themes of death, so view at your own discretion. Second, the background footage for this video was recorded on New Game Plus, which is why my stats are ridiculously overpowered throughout the game. Also, as you can already see from that same background footage, we'll be using Persona 3 Reload as the basis for our analysis. Persona 3 infamously has 4 different versions that are significantly different from each other. While the overall plot is the same between each version, there might be some nuances in dialogue or presentation that are only in Reload and are relevant for our analysis. That also means we won't be talking about the female protagonist route from the portable version. I chose to play Reload for 2 reasons. It was the easiest one to record, and it's the one I like the most. I know some Fez fans despise Reload with all their hearts, so if you're one of them, I hope you're able to enjoy the video regardless. Finally, if you're new here, hi, my name is Scribble, and I make story analyses of video games. If that sounds interesting to you, consider subscribing and sticking around. It's free and helps out a lot, especially since we're almost at that 10,000 subscriber milestone. Alright, we're now ready to begin. Welcome to Persona 3. What better place to start a full-length analysis than the beginning? Especially for Persona 3, since there's a stockpile of interesting things to talk about before we even summon our first persona. Many of these topics don't even get full payoff until the end of the game, but the seeds get planted right away. I mean, the game straight up tells us how it's going to end as soon as we create a new save file. Time waits for no one. All are equal in its flow, all lives born to their ends. You have a single year. Go forth and live in the time given to you. I bet most players don't put much thought into this opening quote, since we have zero context for it and we just want to get into the game. If we do already know what the game plays like, then maybe we write it off as just describing how the game takes place across one school year. By the time we've progressed enough in the game to realize how prominent death is in the story, we may have even forgotten about this opening quote entirely. But yeah, Makoto dies at the end of Persona 3, and it's just not hidden whatsoever. He's explicitly told that he has a year to live and to make the most of it. Being the protagonist of the story doesn't save him since time waits for no one. So why? Why does the game spoil itself immediately? Well, it introduces the inevitability of death as a theme, which we all know becomes extremely relevant later on, but I think it's really meant to accomplish something else besides that. There are two possible readings I can think of here, and interestingly, they're kind of at odds with each other, but they both really thematically fit the game. First, a question. How do you think your daily life would change if you knew with certainty that you'd die in a few months? Would you carry on as normal? Or would you try your best to do things you've always wanted to do because you'd know you couldn't put them off any longer? This opening quote letting us know our time is strictly limited, then, is a way to encourage the player to actually engage with the daily life of the game. There will be an absolute ending. Each action you take progresses the time limit, so to get the most enjoyment playing, you need to proactively do everything you want to do while you still can. Simple enough, right? This assumes that you're able to internalize what the opening quote is telling you, though, and I already mentioned how that can't be taken for granted. The second way to view the purpose of the opening quote relies on us not fully processing it. This might sound strange, but I think this quote could also be in the game specifically to not be thought about. We all fundamentally understand that life is destined to end, right? We all know that we will die one day, but it's probably not something that we actively think about. For the average person, it's likely not something they ever think about until death enters their personal life somehow. So even though we know this fact in our hearts, it's typically not deeply contemplated. That's probably what the average player experience is like with this opening quote, which makes it a neat way of connecting the player and Makoto in the meta-narrative. Both of us are taught the concept of having a limited amount of time to live and experience all that life has to offer right away, but we won't seriously think about what that means until much later when we're forced to. We can't know for certain if either of those interpretations are what was intended, but one thing we can say for sure is that Persona 3 is perfectly happy to spoil this one detail. Knowing the answer of what happens at the very end of the story isn't nearly as important as the journey that comes before it. That's also why I wanted to talk about it now, because analyzing the story with the knowledge that Makoto dies at the end is a pretty interesting experience and lets us notice details we wouldn't have otherwise. Alright, that's more than enough discussion on just some disconnected text on screen. Let's move on to our actual characters and setting. Right after our opening text crawl, we're greeted with some juxtaposition of Makoto calmly making his way to Iwatodai dorm while we cut to clips of Yukari struggling to build the courage to shoot herself in the head. It's one of the most iconic parts of the game. There's so much tension created here for a new player that doesn't understand the context and that Yukari's gun isn't a real one. So, why? Why does the game begin with leading us to believe that this girl we haven't even met yet is trying to take her own life? This is what I would call an atmosphere-establishing sequence. That's not an official term or anything, I just made it up. When a game really wants us, the player, to feel a certain way about its world, it will attempt to convey that feeling early on with a dramatic shot. Think of Breath of the Wild's Great Plateau opening moment instilling a strong sense of wonder. This is the equivalent of that for Persona 3, and the emotion I would argue the game wants us to feel is tense. Specifically, the kind of tension that boils underneath the surface. Tension that exists without any obvious cause. From Makoto's perspective, he's just commuting like he would any other day, completely ignorant to Yukari's situation. It's actually quite nice and cheery on his end, but for us, we're expecting something to go horribly wrong any second. More on that and why the game wants us to feel tense later. Yukari struggles also double as a really strong way to introduce death as a theme in the story without actually killing anyone. In some ways, depicting that struggle to pull the trigger is even more evocative than just seeing a character we don't know yet die. Once we transition to gameplay, the dark hour begins, and Makoto's happy and bright side of things joins Yukari's dark and disturbing one. There are coffins everywhere, an eerie green glow in the sky, a weird ghost boy asking him to sign a contract, the whole 9 yards. Everything turns out fine though. Yukari greets Makoto at the dorm, and while there's some lingering doubt over what happened, it gets smoothed over and Makoto begins settling into his new high school life. There's a lot going on here, but I want to focus on two key details. The mysterious boy comments on how you can't plug your ears or cover your eyes to escape from death, and the contract he asks Makoto to sign asks him to take responsibility for his actions. The former seems just like more hammering in themes that have already been brought up, but the phrasing stands out to me because of Makoto's character design. Hair covers his eyes all the time. He also canonically is always listening to music through earbuds. We can see them during the opening, and they come up occasionally throughout the game. It's kind of interesting, then, that the mysterious boy specifically says, "Plug your ears and cover your eyes." I don't think this is a coincidence. It's a subtle method of storytelling and characterization for Makoto. Just in case you're unaware or don't remember, Makoto's backstory is his parents were killed in an accident 10 years ago, and he's just kind of been floating around the system with no other family. The joke about him is that he's pure depression, or he's emo or whatever based on his looks, but it makes sense with the kind of childhood he's had. I mostly agree with this reading for his state at the beginning of the game. For a while, Makoto basically doesn't care about anything that happens to him. He doesn't have any strong reactions to the Dark Hour. He just kind of goes with the flow when Yukari and Mitsuru are obviously hiding the truth from him. One of the most common depression symptoms is apathy, so if you combine Makoto demonstrating that in spades along with his tragic backstory and being a teenager, it's more likely than not that Makoto struggles with enjoying life. If that's the case, he's certainly not able to live his life to the fullest and take advantage of the time given to him, as the opening quote strongly suggested. Oh, and by the way, if we do take the phrasing to be targeted at Makoto, then it's one of many instances when his death at the end of the game is foreshadowed. As for the contract, it's important in two separate ways that we can't fully discuss yet, but I want to plant the seeds of the analysis for later. The first way is its contents on taking responsibility for your actions. Self-agency and making decisions for yourself are core themes of the game and nearly as important as all the life and death stuff. The contract pretty simply introduces the concept to the story, although we won't get in the weeds with it until much later. The second way the contract is important is pretty curious. Who knows about it? That would be the mysterious boy, who we later learn is named Pharos, and Igor, the caretaker of the Velvet Room. Why these two? Well, we're not meant to know why at this point in the story. We've barely begun still. However, the game wants us to make a connection between Pharos and Igor. These two characters are linked in some way. If you know Persona 3 lore already, then you know they're not actually related from an in-universe perspective, but I do think they're heavily thematically connected. Keep that idea in the back of your mind for now. It might take a while, like maybe until we get to the final boss, but we will come back to this. Okay, going back to how Makoto is likely depressed at the beginning of the game, it fortunately doesn't last that long. I would argue the pivotal moment when Makoto finds a reason to live and starts actually caring about things again is when he awakens to his first persona. This happens roughly 30 minutes into the game, by the way, so he turns himself around pretty quickly. The justification is simple. Makoto puts his own life on the line to save Yukari's. His internal monologue even explicitly says, "I need to protect her." This is a stark contrast from his apathetic attitude shown in the opening. At this point, Makoto has spent a couple of days adjusting to his new life, and he's made friends with Junpei and also Yukari to an extent. Junpei taking Makoto under his wing right away is a really underappreciated kindness. I have no doubt that Makoto would have just walked straight home from school and continued as a loner if not for Junpei trying to make him feel welcome. This is all up to interpretation, but I'm guessing Makoto didn't have this kind of connection where he was originally. Regardless of how you view Makoto's mental state prior to these events though, it's clear that he's now willing to put himself out there to protect his friends. At a bare minimum, he considers his friendships a reason to live. He's so willing to protect them that he's able to shoot himself with the evoker and awaken to his persona. To use an evoker is imagery of accepting your own death and using that memento mori concept as power in of itself. If Makoto were truly still apathetic, I don't think the writers would have him use an evoker. Let's now chat for a bit about the persona Makoto first awakens to. Orpheus. Personas are stated many times throughout the game that they're a reflection of oneself. Personas are also all based on something, usually a mythological figure or creature, and those beings have storied histories behind them. That all means each party member has the persona they do for some particular reason. Igor even draws attention to Makoto awakening to Orpheus specifically, so let's take a look at what Orpheus's deal is and see if we can learn anything. Unfortunately, that's a bit of a complicated topic because Orpheus is an extremely prolific figure in Greek mythology. There are many stories involving him that I don't think are particularly relevant for Persona 3, but what does stand out is that Orpheus is known as the most legendary musician and poet. He perfected tools invented by the gods, and he inspired people and animals alike wherever he traveled. As we'll soon see, this isn't too far off from what Makoto does in the story. Now that he's found a reason to live, Makoto will be putting himself out there in many different situations. He'll join a bunch of different clubs at school, like track and field, art, home ec, and become a natural at all of these activities. He's extremely talented beyond his strength as a persona user, just like Orpheus was a master of the arts. And also like Orpheus, as he meets new people and all the time he spends just living his life, he inspires them. The social links are probably the most famous gameplay mechanic in the Persona series, and for good reason. They're all pretty enjoyable mini character-focused stories, and they're very varied in terms of tone, but they all have something in common. Makoto inspires these people to change their lives for the better. For example, he'll help Keisuke come to the realization that he wants to be a doctor. He'll also help the old couple at the bookstore realize that fostering the growth of the new generation is what their late son would have wanted, rather than keeping a specific memorial up for him. I'm being careful with my choice of words here, by the way. Makoto inspires the social links. He doesn't directly advise them. At most, he offers emotional support or physical support in an emergency. He wants all his connections to make the important decisions on their own. In other words, they need to live for themselves. The options that we're encouraged to pick by the game rewarding us with more social rank points are most often the ones that match the energy of the social link person. And as it turns out, most people don't prefer being told what to do, so this is a decent representation of what it looks like to become close friends with people. Granted, sometimes it goes a little too far. For instance, I don't think encouraging Miyamoto to run despite risking his ability to walk would be ideal in real life, so I wouldn't call it a perfect representation of building genuine connections, but it's generally solid. So when you combine the natural talent with his inspirative qualities, Orpheus is a pretty fitting mythological figure to be Makoto's main persona. A lot of Orpheus myths end in his death too, so add that to the subtle foreshadowing pile. The main takeaway I want you to keep in mind is that distinct quality of inspiring others. It'll crop up again later when Makoto's true thematic role in the story is revealed. Alright, that finally about does it for everything interesting that happens in the first hour of the game. Aside from Orpheus being suddenly ripped to shreds temporarily, but we don't need to worry about that. The training wheels are about to come off as we enter the gameplay loop of living a high school life at day while hunting shadows at night. While Persona 3's story is generally really well liked, if there is one common criticism, it's on this beginning section of the game after all the initial hooks and intrigue are done being built up. Not much happens plot-wise for a long time. You could sum up the major events that progress the story in like 2 sentences for the first 3 months of the game. Some people even go beyond that all the way to October, but I would argue there's a clear cutoff for what I consider the game's first of 3 arcs. The first arc consists of everything from the beginning of the game to the summer vacation trip in July. The second arc is everything from after the vacation to the defeat of the Hanged Man Arcana. The last arc would obviously then be the final 3 months of the game. The last arc division shouldn't be that controversial if you know what happens in the story already, but you might be wondering why I use the summer vacation as another cutoff. The answer is because it's a major shift in the dynamic the main party has with each other. The first arc of the game is mostly getting us invested in these characters and their relationships, so later story beats hit a lot harder. It's an admittedly slow burn, but I think it was important for it to be paced in this way. Since there isn't much going on in the overall story right now, we're forced to pay close attention to the relationships forming among C's members. Despite them all being on the same team, there's visible tension among the main party. C's is initially mostly made of friends, in quotes, that are only friendly due to convenience. Yukari doesn't actually like Mitsuru very much. It stems from a deep-seated resentment of Mitsuru's family, the Kirijo group, and how Yukari believes they had something to do with her father's death. Junpei is intensely jealous of Makoto. Makoto was selected to be the leader, he gets all the special powers, and everyone takes him seriously, unlike Junpei, who's the butt of every joke. This all stems from Junpei's inferiority complex and how he's always wanted to find something that made him feel important. These two issues don't come to a head until later on in the story, but you can see plenty of signs of the tension rising throughout the first arc. Yukari will quietly sigh at some things Mitsuru says, while Junpei will try to insert himself as the hero whenever he gets a chance. In RPG parties that aren't made up of friends from the get-go, you typically see the group of acquaintances grow to become real friends after getting to know each other. That bonding over time is really heartwarming to watch, so it's one of the oldest tricks in the book to get someone emotionally invested. Persona 3 utilizes this trope, but it mixes it up by having things get worse before it gets better. Yukari and Junpei both have a lot of internal struggles they're trying to figure out, and the longer they stay unaddressed, the more resentment builds up, even though it looks relatively normal from the outside. Hey, aren't we just describing tension? The kind that subtly boils in the background? It's the same type of atmosphere established by the opening cinematic of Makoto's arrival alongside Yukari trying to shoot herself. That's why the atmosphere establishing sequence exists and why we're meant to feel tense from the start. It was setting the tone for the rest of the game. This type of tension never really disappears from the story, although the cause of the tension does rapidly escalate. I use the summer vacation as the cutoff for the first arc because that's shortly after everything blows up on July 12th and the group seriously divides. The summer vacation is what helps bring them together again. It's when they finally get a better idea of what they're actually fighting for and have the information needed to talk about their feelings. It's a nice little moral on the importance of communication and honesty instead of just letting issues simmer, and it mostly puts a bow on the main teenage drama conflict. Yukari and Junpei still have some demons to think about, but everything is out in the open by the end of their trip, and C's can finally begin forming genuine bonds. The trip is also when the most important character in the game, and it's not even close, Aegis is introduced, so that's another reason it feels like a suitable transition point in the story. Don't worry, we'll get to her. So that answers one part of the why question, but we still need to answer why the game wants to establish this subtly tense atmosphere, thematically speaking. I think the reason lies in answering another question. Who is the target audience for Persona 3's story? I don't mean just the age group that's meant to play it, which is obviously the range of late teens to young adults. I mean the people that would resonate with a story primarily about finding your own meaning in life, learning to accept death, and treating each day like it could be your last. It's probably the people that don't already have a healthy relationship with death in the first place. What do you think the daily feeling of people who really struggle with mortality is like? I'd imagine it's stuff like feeling constant anxiety about what the future holds, an undertone to all joyous events being temporary because life is destined to end. Perhaps a crippling fear of attachment, lest either they or someone they love passes on too soon. Maybe even recurring intrusive thoughts on what their own death will look like, potentially creating an obsession on if anything exists on the other side. I think it'd be pretty hard to live a fulfilling life with this mental state. Why bother doing anything at all? Even when everything looks bright and cheery, there will be this subtle tension of how it will all unavoidably end. Oh, there it is. Persona 3 wants to establish this atmosphere of subtle tension because it mirrors the feelings of those who struggle with mortality. If we're already one of them, then we'll know it all too well. If we don't have those issues, then we'll be placed into the shoes of those who do. Maybe even develop some temporarily as the game asks us to contemplate our own death. Luckily, the story will aggressively teach us the dangers of leaving this kind of problem unresolved and how to help ourselves get out of this mental situation. The first step is to truly show us why this is a problem by giving us examples of characters that have an unhealthy relationship with mortality. In contrast, we'll also be shown a character with a healthy relationship, and we'll be able to see the differences clearly. We'll know what to avoid and what to strive toward, although we won't get to the how quite yet. That will be in the third arc. The what is the main purpose of the game's second arc. And the first arc was really mostly just plot thread and thematic setups, as well as establishing that baseline tense feeling. Don't worry though, the stakes become way higher when Ken and Shinji join the party. The second arc uses many of the same tricks as the first to create subtle tension. There's obviously history between Shinji, Akihiko, and Mitsuru, and somehow Ken is involved in all of it too. While we don't know the details ahead of time, I think it's pretty easy to deduce that Ken holds a secret grudge against Shinji. I unfortunately don't remember what my thoughts were on their conflict the first time I experienced Persona 3's story, so I can only wonder if a significant amount of people get caught off guard by this setup. We saw Yukari and Junpei have secret grudges against Mitsuru and Makoto. They let it boil to a point it should never have gotten to, but they were at least able to eventually talk it through and get over it. It might be reasonable to think that Ken's grudge against Shinji is the same. Like, Mitsuru and Makoto never really did anything to Yukari and Junpei. The grudges were a result of their own trauma and insecurities. So when Ken starts doing things like planning for someone to look after his pet hamster if something were to happen to him, obsessively train because he needs to get stronger, and ominously comment on how he's finally found his purpose and why he got this power right after Shinji rejoins C's, we might not fully process where this is going and assume it will end like Yukari's and Junpei's. I think that's potentially a big reason why Shinji's death hits as hard as it does. Quick context for the unfamiliar. When Shinji first awakened to his persona a couple years ago, he lost control of it and accidentally destroyed a residential home. This happened to be Ken's house, and his mother died in the chaos. Ken lost everything in that single night, and nobody believed this elementary school kid when he claimed that a monster destroyed his home. Ever since, Ken's sole reason to live has been tracking down who killed his mother and taking revenge. On the other hand, Shinji has been punishing himself for what he did. He dropped out of high school, quit C's, and vowed to never use his persona again. He spends all his time in the shady areas of the city and started taking drugs to suppress his abilities. Every day, his thoughts are consumed by memories of inadvertently killing someone, and he just wastes away, waiting for the drugs he takes to kill him. Ken joining SEES is the one thing that could have convinced Shinji to come back. He would do anything Ken asked of him because he knows he ruined Ken's life and doesn't value his own life anymore. He's fully aware that Ken plans on getting revenge, and he welcomes it because he believes he deserves it. As you can probably already tell, these two characters are the two examples of unhealthy relationships with mortality I was referring to earlier. Let's start with Ken, since his deal is fairly straightforward. He represents the state of being unable to look forward after the death of a loved one. He can only look backward to what happened that day, and he dedicates his entire life to seeking revenge. We should be a little generous with him, though. He's a very young kid, so I'm not expecting him to be fully healed from grief of this magnitude in only 2 years. What I would hope, though, is that he'd find something else to use as a reason to keep living. In fact, there are plenty of candidates. He loves his pet hamster, he's clearly into Phoenix Ranger Featherman R, and seemingly gets along well with the kids in his class. In one of his linked episodes, he gets invited to play soccer, but declines because of his focus on his revenge. Each day he obsesses over the death of his mother is another day he won't find enjoyment in life. It's perfectly normal for him to still be grieving, and some days will always be worse than others. That kind of pain never truly leaves, so we have to learn to live with it. Life goes on, regardless of if we decide to go with it or not. That brings us directly to Shinji, whose tragic story reveals the risks of what could happen if you stop valuing your own life. It could get cut short at any moment. It's hard to attribute fault to Shinji for the accident. It was a supernatural power that he had only just awakened to. I put it more on the adults around him involved with SEES that let something like this happen in the first place. He should never have been in a situation where his unstable persona could have killed an innocent bystander. There's probably some commentary here on how the adults are forcing kids to solve the world's problems and then abandoning them when it doesn't work out. That becomes even more poignant when you factor in the imagery of Shinji and Strega taking persona-suppressant drugs just to stay afloat. We're not going to be focusing on that angle, but I wanted to acknowledge it. A lot more on Strega later, though. Shinji teaches us that every day you spend wallowing in regret for something that can never be undone is another day that accomplishes nothing but bringing you closer to your ultimate end. It's what happens when you don't keep that concept of memento mori in mind. What Shinji should have done is seek help. This kind of trauma isn't something he should go through alone. The complication is Shinji wasn't willing to receive help when offered. It's often said that you can't help someone that doesn't want to help themselves. This is largely true, and it's unfortunate that Shinji was never able to internalize that there was a way out of this hellhole for him. In the fleeting moments when he allows himself to act like a normal teenager again, he's actually a really sweet and caring guy. He loves to cook and garden, and he's fond of animals. There was real potential here for him to heal and be able to enjoy a long and fulfilling life. That just makes it all the more sad when he gets shot by Takaya. His life was cut short, and he spent his last years being miserable by choice. The day after Shinji's death, we see this internal monologue from Makoto. Yesterday was a terrible tragedy. However, I must still go to school today. In my opinion, this is the single best line of dialogue in the game. It succinctly captures the essence of death abiding by no rules and waiting for no one. It crops up whenever it pleases. Life doesn't go on pause. After a death in our lives, we still have the same responsibilities that we did yesterday, maybe even more. It's incomprehensibly painful, depressing, and confusing all at the same time if you haven't experienced it before. The most cruel part of it all is that not everyone suffers with us. Nobody at school really cares about Shinji's death besides the main party. They didn't know him personally. A lot of them didn't even know of him. Who can blame them for talking about his death so casually? They're not being mean on purpose, they just genuinely don't have a connection to Shinji. Maybe if Shinji hadn't spent his time wasting away, the overall reaction would have been different. He could have made real friendships at school and made some sort of small impact on the other students' lives, but we'll never know because he squandered his only opportunity. We're meant to view Shinji's life as a cautionary tale. He only got one shot at life, and this was the result. Don't get me wrong, I'm not blaming him for his mental health issues. Rather, I'm trying to illustrate the reality of what his situation became because he never wanted to help himself. Fleeting moments of happiness and leaving a legacy only known to a handful of people. The past can never be undone. We need to take our time to heal and then gather our strength again to continue living. And that brings us directly to the character that shows an example of a positive relationship with mortality, Koromaru. He's a literal dog that happens to be able to use a persona, and I've kind of always wondered why he was written into the story. Being a dog, he's physically incapable of expressing complex thoughts like the human party members. He has, like, one single moment in the game when he's relevant after his introduction. Did they just think it'd be cool to have a dog that can use a persona? Or maybe they just wanted a mascot character? Well, yeah, both of those could be true, but Koromaru also serves a unique thematic role as a dog. First, how is Koromaru a positive example? Well, his backstory is that his owner died in an accident, and ever since he's kind of just become the communal town dog that everybody knows. He would vigorously protect the shrine that his owner took care of, ensuring the priest's legacy would always stay intact. Even though he lives with Seize now, Koromaru still regularly visits the shrine and pays his respects, but he's no longer tethered to it. He's motivated to protect the community as a whole, knowing that's what makes him feel fulfilled with his life. It would have been easy to write Koromaru as another depressed character like Ken or Shinji. He could have just laid around at the shrine all day, growling at anyone that got close because they might harm his memories of the priest, but they didn't. Maybe he did do that for a time, but at some point, he realized it wasn't a good use of the limited time he had on Earth. I really like this detail in Reload that Koromaru starts with 2 theurgy skills. Every other party member only gets their second theurgy after they come to an epiphany about themselves, but Koromaru already went through his development prior to joining Seize. That's more proof of Koromaru's enlightened view on life and death. So why is Koromaru a dog? I believe it's tied directly to how Koromaru is one of the best examples in the game of how we should think about life and death. It's part of another theme of Persona 3 and how every life, no matter how short or even who or what it belongs to, has meaning. If a dog can have so much emotional impact or teach humans really valuable lessons, then surely each and every person can have that kind of effect on the world too. Every major character in the game grapples with trying to answer what the meaning of their life is, but I think this concept is actually best demonstrated in a social link, the Sun Arcana, Akinari Kamiki, the objectively best social link in the game, and arguably the entire Persona franchise. He's a terminally ill young man that's on his last legs. There's nothing anyone can do for him anymore. He was sick from birth and never got to live a normal life, always having been debilitated by his illness and with the knowledge he was destined to die young. His social link grapples with really gut-wrenching questions and feelings. Nobody can really understand what his existence is like. He vents about how he doesn't understand the reason for why he was born in such a pathetic body. He regrets causing his mother so much pain. But he's the Sun Arcana. The sun represents success, vigor, joy, and a bunch of other positive emotions. It's such a brilliant subversion because his whole social link arc is about coming to an understanding that his life does have meaning. The children's story he writes about the pink alligator's seemingly pointless life actually turning out to provide for the jungle for many generations after is just so perfect. Sorry, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I just had to. This social link is so good. To sum it up, Koromaru is a dog because all life has meaning, just like the pink alligator and Akinari's did. Shinji's life counts too. It's true that it could have been so much more, but his dying words to Ken helped him realize that life was worth living, and I think Shinji would be able to rest in peace with that knowledge. The last couple weeks of October are a weird transitory period in the story. We're between major events of Shinji's death and the Hanged Man shadow fight. The atmospheric tension dissipates for a little because Seize is led to believe that all their problems will come to an end at the next full moon. So let's take a little breather and evaluate where we're at in our analysis. I promised we'd answer why the story follows the life of a high school student, why the full moon is used as a recurring symbol, why Takaya is shirtless, and also why we, the player, are represented in the story by a character other than Makoto. We have answered exactly none of these questions so far, but that's because Persona 3 is very thematically backloaded. I know I've dragged on for a long time on just the setup, but hopefully all of that was still interesting. It's time to buckle in, because the real meat of the story starts now. The third arc kicks off with a bang. Shortly after the defeat of the Hanged Man Shadow, Seize learns that all their efforts were in vain. Defeating the Shadows was actually the goal of the secret twist villain, Seize president Shuji Ikutsuki, the entire time. He wants to usher in what's known as the Fall and wipe out all life on Earth. Seize has been selected as sacrifices to hasten the Fall's arrival, and Ikutsuki reprograms Aegis to subdue them on crosses for the ritual. Ikutsuki's betrayal was one of the biggest questions to me when analyzing the narrative. Honestly, Ikutsuki as a whole is a gigantic question mark. What is his purpose in the story? Obviously, the game was going for a shocking plot twist that the goal we've been working toward was actually the villain's plan all along, but they didn't need Ikutsuki to manipulate the party. The actions he wants the party to take are killing dangerous shadows that threaten the world as a whole. Any group of heroes would logically eliminate those shadows when they crop up. It's not something they need to be convinced is the right thing to do. They do need motivation to fight for themselves, but there are plenty of other ways to write that into the story. At the risk of sounding media illiterate, Ikutsuki's true personality and goals are also just not foreshadowed whatsoever. The closest he comes to slipping up is during the vacation when he says, in a weird kind of way when discussing why Aigis recognizes Makoto. He does also immediately dismiss the topic by claiming Aigis could have just been half asleep or something. That said, I don't think this is enough to make a logic and evidence-based prediction that Ikutsuki is evil. While he may be unable to summon a capital P persona, his pun-loving, goofy, reliable mentor lowercase p persona is rock solid. Aigis makes a comment in the lounge that Ikutsuki never dropped this facade, and I agree with her. I believe it's reasonable to guess that Ikutsuki knew more about the Dark Hour than he was letting on, but any prediction on him being evil I think comes from pure luck or just making a meta guess on a potential plot twist. If something tipped you off, let me know in the comments. I never saw Ikutsuki's betrayal coming the first time I played Persona 3, but for this playthrough I knew he was evil beforehand, so I was constantly on the lookout for clues I may have missed. I legitimately found nothing substantial beyond that one Aigis comment. I did find one non-substantial thing though. A meta detail maybe. He kind of looks like Takaya, doesn't he? The hair is already really close, but the face shape is similar too. Take off the glasses, give him some colored contacts, stop shaving for a day, and, well, you can see it, yeah? If he shares design elements with an established evil character, then maybe he is too. And that's when it hit me. What if Ikutsuki looking like Takaya wasn't a coincidence? From there, everything fell into place. Who is the character placed in primary opposition to Ikutsuki? That'd be Takeharu Kirijo, Mitsuru's father. He's the one who gets into an actual standoff with him, after all. They're also framed as ideological opposites. Ikutsuki wants to bring about the fall to put an end to what he believes is a miserable existence and bring about the salvation of death to all. Kirijo, on the other hand, wants to see everyone live with the life they're given. His life's work is undoing the mistakes of his own father that thought like Ikutsuki. Now, do you notice anything about Kirijo's design? Specifically, the hairstyle and the fact that his right eye is covered by an eye patch. Who else do we know with that kind of hair, has his right eye covered, and also wants everyone to live life for themselves? It's Makoto. I would argue Ikutsuki and Kirijo's designs are an intentional parallel to Takaya and Makoto, the game's actual most prominent villain and hero respectively. Takaya and Makoto embody the same ideologies that Ikutsuki and Kirijo do, and they're going to be the driving forces behind the philosophical conflict in the game's final arc. That's all well and good, but so what? What's the point of setting up this parallel? I think the answer is very simple. This final arc is going to be a very heavy one with lots of different perspectives, and Persona 3 wants to be sure we're equipped to handle it. The full scope of Strega's beliefs will finally reveal themselves and clash with C's, and the game will even test us as a player to see if we really understand its messages by giving us a choice that can lead to a bad ending. The game aims to preempt these conflicts by telling us what the correct answer is before we even begin, because it's very easy to not understand what exactly makes Strega's mentality so dangerous. We'll get more into it all in a bit because we have to talk about this handsome devil first, but take a look at Kirijo's final words for now. Death as deliverance is an ideology no one should ever embrace. That's literally one of the game's biggest takeaways in plain text, although we don't have a full understanding of what death as deliverance really means or looks like yet. However, by having a Makoto parallel say this to a Takaya parallel and have him treated as a hero for it, we'll be predisposed to being on Persona 3's side of the aisle by the time we're actually forced to make a decision. Oh, and also, add having the Makoto parallel die to save the others to the subtle foreshadowing pile for Makoto's actual death to save the others later. Alright, with all that chaos now settled, Ikutsuki dead, and no direction of what to do about the Dark Hour now, it's the perfect time for the story to introduce the most totally unsuspicious character ever, Ryoji Mochizuki. I think the intention is for alarm bells to ring in our heads as soon as we see him. For one, he appears right after Pharos says goodbye forever to Makoto. Then he also just has the same eyes and beauty mark as Pharos. The original sprite work I think makes it more obvious these two characters are related, but you can still see it in Reload. Nobody else has reason to be alarmed though. No one else knows about Pharos, and even if Makoto recognized Pharos' face in Ryoji, he has no reason to be afraid. Pharos was a genuine friend of his, a real social link. A little suspicious he had the Death Arcana and he only appeared in the Dark Hour, but nobody's perfect. He warned Makoto about the ordeals at the full moons, and he even kept Makoto up to date with as much information as he could remember about the fall. Makoto doesn't have much reason not to trust him, but it's impossible for us as a player to not be at least a little inherently suspicious of the Ghost Boy associated with death. Aigis is the only character that recognizes Ryoji for being dangerous. We don't find this out until the end of the month, but there's no point in beating around the bush. Ryoji is the Death Arcana shadow that Aigis sealed away in Makoto 10 years ago. He's free now thanks to the defeat of the other major Arcana shadows. He is the pure concept of death personified. And that personification is a total womanizer. Why? It's established in the plot that Ryoji gained his human form from growing inside of Makoto's human body as Pharos, but that's not what I mean. What is the thematic purpose of writing personified death with this personality? I think there are many reasons, but the most important one is to make Ryoji seem like a goofball. We already know Persona 3 wants to convey that death is nothing to be feared, so when Ryoji is getting into wacky anime hijinks, it helps soften death's appearance. The womanizing stuff is clearly meant to be played for laughs. He's not outright harassing anyone, and if anything, most of the girls wish he hit on them more because he's explicitly stated to be very attractive in-universe. His flirting only doesn't work on the C's girls. It's important that Ryoji is portrayed in a positive manner through and through. He may be death, but he's genuine with his kindness and friendship with everyone. There's no secret evil personality or anything because death isn't malicious. It's just a fact of life. His flirtatious personality serves another purpose that I find more interesting on a thematic level. It demonstrates Ryoji's desire to live in the moment, engaging in activities that grant pleasure in the now but with no real forward thinking. Asking out every girl you meet to dinner is a constant dopamine rush, especially when you're mostly successful, but what happens next? Does he really feel anything toward these girls, or is he just looking for the high of the chase? Did he really think through the ramifications of the Hot Springs plan with Junpei? To be honest, him becoming fast friends with Junpei is another sign of how he prioritizes living in the now. I would argue Ryoji engages in this kind of behavior because he is death and all he knows is death. Ryoji has no understanding of human culture outside of whatever he picked up through osmosis in Makoto. That means he physically cannot fathom why humans do things like plan for the future. His understanding of reality is that all that awaits them with certainty is death itself. That's what has him so confused in his linked episode during the November school trip. Why do people bother to form long-lasting bonds with each other when it will all eventually end? Why not just live in the moment? This ties directly into the ultimate choice Ryoji gives Makoto. Ryoji's appearance means the fall is predestined. The being who brought death to Earth known as Nyx will descend back to the planet and wipe out all life. Ryoji informs C's that killing him would erase all their memories of the Dark Hour and delay the fall for a little bit longer. They'd be able to live their last few months in ignorant bliss, which Ryoji views as far better than the alternative of knowing their unavoidable death fast approaches. It's pretty obvious the game wants us to spare Ryoji and confront Nyx. At a surface level, it's more symbolism for Memento Mori. If our choices are remembering or forgetting death, and remembering death is the only way to get the good ending, then, well, we should probably keep our deaths in mind. On a deeper level though, killing Ryoji also does something quite interesting. It philosophically aligns us with Strega. I feel like it's easy to misunderstand what Strega actually believes, because it seems counterintuitive at first. Do you know what the other Latin phrase is that's commonly associated with Memento Mori? That'd be Carpe Diem, meaning seize the day. If you aren't familiar, it's essentially a mantra to not waste your precious time on Earth. Take advantage of the time you're given and make the most out of each day. It should be obvious why it pairs well with Memento Mori. If we remember that we will die, then we'll know we won't get a second chance in life, so we'll be encouraged to seize each day. The weird thing about it is that this is basically Strega's philosophy. In the final arc, they reveal how they only live in the moment. They claim the present is all that matters, and they do whatever they feel is right. They're Carpe Diem extremists, and they're meant to be representations of the wrong lessons you could take away from Persona 3. They fully embrace death. They don't fear it. They use it as motivation to seize each day. The problem is they go too far. Since their lives will end and they have no idea when, they simply don't care about the future. It is tragic how this mindset is a result of having their lives robbed by the Kirijo Group's experiments, so how they came to think this way is understandable, but it doesn't change how it's wrong. It's good to live in the moment and enjoy the present, but with no forward thinking whatsoever, how can you rely on the good times lasting? This is exactly what happens in the bad ending. Everyone forgets about the fall and goes back to living perfectly happy lives. They're living in the moment with no thoughts of the future now. They're making the most of the time they're given. Makoto, Junpei, and Yukari make plans to go have fun with karaoke. We never actually see the moment of the fall. The final shot of the bad ending is just Yukari singing, and I think that makes it way more powerful. We don't need to see the fall. We know these characters are doomed. Whatever horrors we imagine the fall to be are probably way scarier than what could be implemented in-game, so instead the implication is used to be way more evocative. That harrowing feeling illustrates to us why Strega's philosophy is wrong. We could have done something about it, but we didn't. If we forever live in the moment and find ourselves in a hole of our own digging in the future, then we'll experience the same kind of regret. This goes back in time a bit, but I also want to add that it's fitting Junpei is the one that grows close to Chidori. Junpei thought pretty similarly to Strega for a while. He has no idea what he wants to do with his life. He avoids thinking about it because it just reminds him of his own failures and limitations. The resolution of his character arc is him realizing that he has an obligation to think about what he wants to do in life after Chidori sacrifices herself for him. And that right there is one of Persona 3's ultimate messages. It's not enough to practice Memento Mori and Carpe Diem. You need a real reason to live, something in the future to work toward. Strega doesn't have this, and thus they latch onto death, saving them from a miserable existence. They preach death as deliverance because they never found their reason to live, and it destroyed them. This is why Takaya, the face of Strega, is shirtless. It's to clearly show how emaciated he is. He's not healthy, and it symbolically represents how death as deliverance as an ideology eats away your entire being. After all, why bother taking care of yourself if you're just going to die and be saved anyway? There's actually a social link that further reinforces this concept. The Moon, the Gourmet King, Nozomi Suemitsu. In my opinion, this is the most underrated social link story in the game, even though Suemitsu himself isn't very likable. It fits the greater themes of the story so well because what starts as just a comedy of this overweight, obnoxious kid drowning himself in food, ends in Makoto helping him escape a death as deliverance scam. After his twin brother's death, Suemitsu completely stopped taking care of himself and looked for a way out. He had a massive inferiority complex about his brother, and he couldn't find a reason to live for himself, so he latched onto death. That made him fall for an MLM death cult scheme where he would have to pay fees and induct other people so he could be saved and go to paradise when this world ends. He hurts himself and others with these scams, which again goes to show how harmful death as deliverance is. I should also mention it's pretty fitting that Suemitsu is the Moon Arcana. As we'll learn in the final boss fight, the moon itself is Nyx. Since Nyx is death, every time we see the full moon in the story, we should try reading it as a symbol of death. It actually works out surprisingly well. Suemitsu obviously has the death as deliverance thing preached in the final arc, but the full moon crops up all the time otherwise. Apathy syndrome cases rising as the full moon comes closer is another example of how people struggle to care about life when death enters it. The full moon is the symbol of the dark hour, and as a result, Persona 3 as a whole. The question then becomes, for what reason is Nyx the moon? Why is the full moon used as the symbol? Well, the moon is ever present in the sky, even though we can't always see it. Our view of it slowly grows larger with time until it becomes full. This mirrors how death always exists as a fact of life, but only rears its head when it's somebody's time. There's another aspect of the moon that fits into the death symbolism, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Aside from establishing how critical having some forward thinking and a motivating reason to live is, Persona 3 also emphasizes how this reason must be decided strictly by yourself. This harkens back to the contract Makoto is asked to sign. Everyone must take responsibility for their actions, meaning you must accept that your decisions are your own. That's why Makoto never tries telling people the answer to what they want to do in life, even if we can pick up on it. We let them figure it out for themselves. If it came from somebody else, the choice is no longer meaningful. All the party members have their moments of finding a reason to live, and this is usually when they awaken into their second persona. Symbolically, we can read that as them becoming imbued with a sense of renewed life by finding a reason to keep living. This is also likely why in the original version of the game and Fez, you couldn't directly control your party members. You could give them direction, but ultimately their decisions were their own. I agree with Fez fans that this is a strong way to have ludonarrative harmony in the game, but I don't personally think it makes for very engaging gameplay, so I always preferred using the direct commands of later releases. I appreciate some good ludonarrative harmony, but not at this cost for a 70-hour or so game. Alright, it's all well and good to establish that we need a reason to live and why we need it, but how do we actually find one for ourselves? This, dear viewer, is what we've been building up to this entire time. Persona 3 has actually been showing us exactly what we, the player specifically, should do to find a reason to live if we don't have one already. That's because we're in the story, or an analog for us is, at least. We're shown repeated examples of this character learning exactly what they need to do to really and truly live. Have an idea yet? Well, first, let's talk about who they learn from. Makoto. Makoto is placed on a holy pedestal by the narrative. He's amazing at everything he does, from physical activities to forming deep relationships with others. By having us, the player, see things through his perspective, we get a chance to learn the magic. He's our teacher, not our mirror. Assuming as we play the game we do the things we're rewarded for doing, we'll see that he actively improves himself every day. He builds his charm, courage, and academics through tons and tons of different activities he experiments with, and when he's improved himself enough, he can use his experience to connect with others beyond surface-level friendships. Everything he does for fun helps serve his personal reason to live, forming bonds with others. And hey, if you're trying to max out every social link in one run, then there's some more ludonarrative harmony for you as you meticulously map out each day. This also ties into why the game follows the life of a high school student. High schoolers are at the perfect time in their lives for experimentation. Find out what you like doing. Try a bunch of different things. Maybe you'll find your passion, but even if not, you can take the skills you've gained and apply them to a different area of life. Or maybe you'll form lasting friendships with the people you meet along the way. The best way to find your reason is to just do stuff. Simple trial and error. Is it over for you if you're already past high school? Of course not, but the game can only have one setting. This is just what they picked to demonstrate that experimentation is the key. There's something else about Makoto that might help convince you that he's meant to be a teacher of sorts. He is what's known in literature as a Christ figure. Yes, as in Jesus Christ. If you're unfamiliar, this is a super common technique used by authors to write characters they want to serve as moral teachers or amplify their honorable qualities, usually as a martyr. They most often accomplish this by putting them in situations that invoke imagery of Jesus Christ. With that in mind, take a look at this short list of details about Makoto in Persona 3. He's ultra compassionate. He inspires the people around him. He's hung up on a crucifix. Death was attached to him from the moment we learned of him. Like the story of Jesus he was sent to die for humanity's sins. Makoto ends up sacrificing himself to save the world from Nyx. The final social link in the game, the Judgment Arcana of the Nyx Annihilation team, when maxed out, allows us to fuse the persona Messiah. While the game is purposely vague about which religious figure the Messiah represents, since this is very culturally sensitive, Jesus Christ is a popular answer for his identity. And would you look at that? The Messiah persona is just a recolored Orpheus, Makoto's other half. Still not convinced the writers wanted to invoke Christ illusions with Makoto? How do you explain Takaya then? Look at his hair. Look at how he becomes the so-called Messiah of the Nyx cult. He's portrayed as a foil to Makoto over and over again since they both are characters with full acceptance of death, but with vastly different philosophies sprouting from it. Takaya as a subverted Christ figure preaches the negative death as deliverance drivel, while Makoto demonstrates the power of finding your reason. You could also maybe say something about how Takaya only superficially emulates Christ qualities in his appearance, whereas Makoto practices actual Christ-like behavior. Now we've finally talked about everything we need to determine who we are in Persona 3. This character would be the one that embodies the journey we've gone on. A while ago, I asked who the target audience for Persona 3's story is. This is a story for people who don't already have a good relationship with mortality, and/or don't know what they live for. There just so happens to be a character that perfectly fits both of these descriptions. Who is the character that starts without their own reason to live? Who is the character that's unfamiliar with most of what life has to offer, but tries it out for the sake of it? Who is the character initially unhealthily obsessed with death, viewing it as hostile and dangerous instead of just a part of life? Who is the character that tried to advocate for killing Ryoji before realizing they would have missed the point? Who is the character whose social link is about learning the meaning of life and figuring out what they want to do for themselves? Who is the character connected with us, the player, in the Ludo narrative and remembering the dark hour even in the bad ending? Who is the character that gets the sole privilege of witnessing Makoto's final moments and singing the emotional credit song from their perspective? It's Aigis. She is our surrogate in the story. Aigis enters the narrative far from passing as a human. Makoto can't even form a bond with her at that point. She's not truly living yet, and thematically speaking, we can say this is because she hasn't solved her two primary issues. She doesn't have her own reason for living, and she doesn't have a good relationship with death. She's programmed to be a shadow extermination weapon. It's not something she decided for herself. She doesn't give Ryoji a chance to explain himself. She recognizes him as death, and in her mind, death can't be a friend. Throughout her time spent with C's, though, Aigis grows to learn what life is really like. She starts attending school, even though she has no real need to do so. Unconsciously, Aigis starts forming a real sense of attachment to all the C's members, and that's the key to what makes Aigis truly become alive. Her bonds help her find joy in life beyond her programming, and they are what allow her to break free from Ikutsuki's brainwashing. Let's try reading into this scene again, but now with the angle that Aigis represents the player, and also keep in mind that target audience for Persona 3's story. Since Ikutsuki is one of the representatives for the death as deliverance ideology the game heavily condemns, symbolically speaking, we can read this series of events as this target audience type person initially succumbing to such a mentality. Aigis fighting for Ikutsuki as a mindless robot is thematically perfect for showing how this thought process robs you of your life, and it's also emblematic of how to escape it. Aigis just did stuff for the sake of it. She hung out with C's, she went to school, she took care of Makoto during his illness, she found things she wanted to do on an individual level that weren't programmed by somebody else, and that is what allows her to wake up. I'll also add that it's interesting how Aigis' directive was to exterminate shadows. You could maybe read this symbolically as the player expecting to just play a normal monster-killing RPG, but ending up falling in love with the amazing cast and social sim elements and then learning how to live life in general. That seems like the theoretically perfect outcome for a player the writers could ask for, and it's basically Aigis' story. That's not the whole solution of the puzzle, though. Aigis may have escaped her robotic fate, but she's not fully human yet. On a thematic level, it should be pretty obvious that Aigis becoming fully human would mark when she becomes enlightened. Perhaps when she's gone through a metamorphosis of sorts, given how her most important body part is called the papillon heart, meaning butterfly heart. Her transformation from a caterpillar to a butterfly can't happen until she comes up with a clear-cut answer of what she wants to do with her life. Ironically, she'll find her answer on the verge of death. When Aigis loses her battle against Ryoji, she's out of commission for about a month. When she finally comes back, her behaviors are significantly less robotic, and it's because for the first time, Aigis feared losing herself. She doesn't have the ability to physically die. She can always be repaired, and even in the worst case, her programming data still exists and she can be remade. However, what she feared in her last moments of consciousness after being defeated by Ryoji was losing her memories of her friends. She felt legitimately scared. She just wants to continue spending time with the people she's grown to love. That would be the equivalent of death for her. Even if another Aigis could be rebuilt, she realized that she doesn't want to stop being this Aigis. That fundamental fear of death, the realization that the beautiful times will be over someday, the fact that everything living is destined to end. That connection that it can still happen to her is what causes Aigis to start truly living. She's able to be convinced that sparing Ryoji is the right move. She no longer views death as a pure enemy to defeat. She starts searching for her own meaning in life by questioning the meaning of others' lives. What do they have that she doesn't? and she eventually does find her own reason to live. She wants to be close to Makoto. Whether that's a good reason or a bad reason doesn't matter right now. It's her reason, and now that she's found it, Aigis becomes truly alive. There's one more topic we need to discuss, but in reality, Aigis has already given us the answer. Death is what made her live. Persona 3 wrote Aigis' story in this way because of its final message. To live is to die. To die is to live. They are one in the same, as claimed by the Nyx avatar in the final battle. Life is beautiful because it is destined to end. Death is beautiful because it can only happen to the living. Would you appreciate a sunrise as much if night never existed? Would we be as grateful for a moonlit night had we no knowledge of a bright sunny day? That's the second reason why Nyx is the moon and is used to represent death. The moon reflects the light of the sun, and the sun is the source of all life. They are inextricably linked, just as life and death are. It's also the second reason why Ryoji is supposed to be attractive. Death is just as beautiful as life. The Velvet Room's appearance is said to reflect the journey of each of its guests. In Persona 5, it's a prison. In Persona 4, it's a limousine. In Persona 3, it's an elevator. All of these represent the lives of the protagonists of the modern Persona games. The elevator, for our focus, is one that's in a constant state of upward motion. It finally arrives at its destination just before Makoto makes the decision to sacrifice himself for the sake of the world. It's pretty clear that the elevator is supposed to symbolize life in general. Time only flows in one direction. Its arrival marks Makoto's death. So then, could we say that the Velvet Room itself symbolizes life? It's where Makoto goes to strengthen his personas, after all, and to do so, he calls upon the power of his meaning to live, his bonds with others. Only two characters knew about the contract at the very beginning of the game. Pharos, who we now know is actually a personification of death, and Igor, the face of the Velvet Room, a place of life. Igor and Pharos may not be related lore-wise, but since they represent life and death respectively, they had to be thematically tied together because life and death must always be tied together. The two major tragic deaths in the story, Shinji and Chidori, both come with invigorating new life figuratively into Ken and literally into Junpei. The game is careful to keep this balance. The final boss theme of the Nyx avatar, Battle Hymn of the Soul, is a remix of the Velvet Room theme. The most pure form of death imaginable features all the motifs of life. And to top it all off, the main theme of Reload is titled Full Moon, Full Life. The full moon is Nyx, and Nyx is death. You can also read the song as Full Death, Full Life. They are forever interlinked. Alright, it's time to wrap things up. It's been a hell of a journey, but what have we learned today? Persona 3 is filled to the brim with symbolism. There are so many moving parts to the story that have so much thought put into them that I doubt anyone can catch all of it on their first playthrough. I might not even have been comprehensive, for all I know. If there's one thing I want you to take away from all of this, though, I'd hope the answer is obvious. It's not any of this fancy memento mori, carpe diem, anti-death as deliverance, subtle atmospheric tension, all life has meaning, Aigis being the player, or life and death being the same stuff. It's to find your own reason to live. It doesn't matter much what it is in particular, as long as it's not hurting yourself. Everyone needs something to work toward. Memento mori and carpe diem are great mantras to keep in mind, but they only go so far. You need a goal. You only get one chance at life, so don't waste it, like Shinji unfortunately did. Be like Aigis and follow Makoto's example. Improve yourself, try new things, make bonds with others. You never know what might happen to change your life for the better. When you've done that, then you'll know with certainty you'll be satisfied when your time comes. The full moon sure is beautiful, isn't it? We have now finally reached the end. Thank you so much for watching, but I encourage you to stick around until the actual end for a surprise. First though, if you enjoyed the video, please do make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe so I can make more videos like these. These videos take me a lot of effort to make, so if you'd really like to help them survive on YouTube, you can also consider becoming a channel member. Before we truly end, there are a couple of things I wanted to mention that didn't quite fit anywhere in the script. First, would you believe me if I told you this is the first script I ever wrote? Well, you shouldn't, because it isn't, but it was actually the first idea for a video I ever conceptualized. Persona 3 was originally going to be the first game I covered on this channel after I got inspired by playing through Reload right after its release. I did everything I could until it was time to capture footage, and then I realized I didn't really feel like playing the same 70-hour game that I just finished again. I love Persona 3, but I would have burned myself out immediately, so it got put on the back burner until I was ready, and so here it is. Second, I just want to give some props to all the extra character writing Reload added. That contributes a lot in making it my favorite version of the game. Shout out to Takaya and Ryoji in particular for their Reload portrayals. There's also just so many extra little details in things like the dorm conversations and special activities. And the linked episodes are great too, obviously. Finally, you may be asking yourself, what about episode Aegis, or the answer as it was called in Fez? If my primary hook for the video was claiming that Aegis is the real player surrogate, then surely it would have been a good idea to talk about the expansion where she's the main playable character, right? And I completely agree with you. There was just one problem. Look at the length of this video. I had to cut myself off somewhere to avoid this becoming 2 hours long, so I decided to cover episode Aegis in its own individual video. YouTube is kinda weird about uploading multiple videos on the same day, so here's the deal. 24 hours from this video's release date, I'll be posting an episode Aegis literary analysis. It'll be much shorter than this video, but it was substantial enough to make its own thing. If you're watching soon after this video's release date, then check back here tomorrow. If you're already in the future, then go ahead and move on to the episode Aegis analysis for the complete Persona 3 experience. Alright, that's it for real. Thank you once again for watching, and see you next time.